Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Respect, starring Jennifer Hudson, Forrest Whitaker, Marlon Wayans, Audra McDonald, Mark Marone, Titus Burgess, and Mary J. Blige, directed by Lisa Tommy. Now, what do I know about Aretha Franklin, which is what this movie's a biopic about? Well, I know a couple of her songs, like Freedom and R-E-S-P-C-T. That's the name of this movie, by the way. So I have seen it before. So I was curious about her as a singer. And what do I think of it? Well, let's see if it's the same as I think of it now. Let's get into it. As a 10-year-old girl in Detroit in the year 1952, living in her father's house, Aretha Franklin has a beautiful singing voice, and her father, C.L. Franklin, played by Forrest Whitaker, or as I'm going to call him for the rest of the show, Mr. Franklin, takes her out of bed to sing one song, and she does sing and impresses everybody. And the actress playing a young Aretha has an incredible singing voice. As the next day comes, Aretha's grandmother loves her singing voice, and Mama Franklin comes by the house of Mr. Franklin and takes her to her house. And I'm led to believe they're divorced and came from a dysfunctional family. And when they practice piano and sing with the compromise of sing talking, and she teaches Aretha to say yes and tells her nobody owns her voice except Aretha and God, while Aretha gets back to Mr. Franklin's house and says her goodbyes to her mother as she drives away, and Mr. Franklin forces Aretha to sing for his church, and the performance by Forrest Whitaker is great, as I always love his presence. Aretha is awakened by a man who flirts with her while she's still 10 years old, and the next day comes, and the grandmother almost forces Aretha to fix her hair, or else she'll smack her behind, I'll say it best. As the grandmother knows something is wrong, and nighttime comes, and Aretha wakes up and hangs out with Mr. Franklin for a while until he gets a call and learns about Mama Franklin's death. And Aretha hears what's wrong with him as Aretha overhears her mother is dead and gets depressed even on her birthday, which makes me feel so bad for Aretha, as I relate with the characters from Good Times to Bad. While Aretha can't blow out the candles and is silent for 3 weeks, maybe a little bit more for a while, while Mr. Franklin can't deal with it as she plays the piano for her choir practice, while Mr. Franklin can't deal with her silence, and I know what that's like, as the cinematography was fine in my opinion. As we move on to the year 1959, now I'm a little confused as far as the timeline goes, and Aretha as an adult played in an amazing performance by Jennifer Hudson, who's an Oscar winner from Dreamgirls and who also has a beautiful singing voice, sings in front of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. while he talks about a change with the African American people by marching with them. And Mr. Franklin doesn't approve of Aretha going through that while she's a teenager and has 2 kids while Aretha travels around with Mr. Franklin, who has a party at his house with the family and the church group, which includes Ted White, played by Marlon Wayans, whom Mr. Franklin doesn't like because he flirts with Aretha and she's his daughter, and her sister advises her to not go to Ted in the first place. And the acting is very good by Jennifer Hudson, Forrest Whitaker, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but Marlon Wayans, despite I don't like his character, and I'm not a big fan of his in general, but he does a good job with the performance, in my opinion. Mr. Franklin makes an announcement about Aretha going to New York City and to Columbia Records, and her records her first album by John Hammond, played by Tate Donovan, in the year 1960, as Aretha and Mr. Franklin have a meeting with Hammond, and she gets welcomed to Columbia Records to sing gospel songs, and has a few years of records coming out in the past 3 years. And we move on to the year 1963, in New York, and one of her family friends, Dina Washington, played by Mary J. Blige, who freaks out when Aretha sings one of her old songs and asks Aretha about what does she want to sing in her life, and she wants hits, is what she says to Dina, while Dina is making Aretha cry. And I sense jealousy from Dina, as I get the impression Mary J. Blige is like that in real life. But I could be wrong. Well, next day comes, and as the phone rings, she thinks about how she got pregnant at a young age, and she comes into the studio 68 minutes late while Mr. Franklin tells Hammond about how darkness of a past in which she calls Demon, while he tells Aretha to apologize to Hammond, and he slaps her in the face because she says something like he doesn't make music that's good for her. And Mr. Franklin comes off rather harsh and disrespectful to Aretha like that. But the editing in these scenes was good. But to be fair, this is sort of a long movie, but it still works as a biopic. Aretha gets to a party in New York and bumps into Ted, and they go out in New York and have the best night of their life as they start smooching, and Ted calls a taxi cab, bringing Aretha back to her place, and next day she sings beautifully while thinking about Ted, and she messes up the take and continues without a break, and we move on to Aretha and Ted going on a date and smooch, and she sleeps in his bed and wakes up and sees his apartment has her albums, and she asks him which is the best album, and he says they have something special in them, as he's heard them multiple times. As I like the chemistry between Jennifer Hudson and Marlon Wayans, despite I'm not a fan of Marlon Wayans in general, but he's great as a bad character, as he does a good job with the performance. Aretha invites Ted to her father's house, and Mr. Franklin almost shoots Ted to death, and she knows he's got another record coming with her sister Carolyn, and Aretha tells Mr. Franklin she needs new songs and wants Ted to manage her, and Mr. Franklin says to Aretha he won't take her back, even when she begs him. And Aretha says goodbye to her kids, and we move on to Ted hiring a new agent named Jerry Wexler, played by Mark Moran, who makes demands for Aretha, Ted does, and I get the impression Ted is taking way too much advantage of her at this point, kind of like Colonel Tom Parker with Elvis Presley, for example. And we move on to a place in Alabama in the year 1967, as Aretha and Ted arrive at the studio and meets the owner of the place named Rick Hall, whom Ted doesn't really like all that much. And they record the song while everybody is arguing, and people are arguing with one another, which makes me sad, as sometimes this was a sad movie, but that's what biopics do best. After making their first hit song, Rick puts his hand on Aretha's shoulder, and we get back to the motel, and Aretha and Ted have an argument about leaving town and wants to go back to a musician. He starts abusing her, while Rick comes by their motel room to have a talk with Rick, and as Ted comes off rather disrespectfully, and it comes down to a fight, and Aretha tries to escape, and I didn't get the impression they were married at this point in time, because keep in mind, I wasn't alive back then, and Aretha comes home with a black eye that I get the feeling Ted did on his own damn self, and Mr. Franklin welcomes her back home along with her own children, one of her children, while Jerry calls Aretha everywhere, including Mr. Franklin's house, as does Ted, and one of her sisters tells Ted to go to hell. And we move on to one of Aretha's kids hearing her first hit song, I'll say, on the radio, makes Carolyn and her other sister Irma as her backup singers, and she comes back to New York, and Ted comes back home with her and tries to apologize as he confesses he has demons as well, and to help him fight his own and take him back. And if it were me, I'd be like, hell no, and get the hell out of my life. But of course, she takes him back, which after what he's done to her is a bad way to go, despite this is a pretty good movie and with soul and spirit of African American singers. Aretha can't sleep and writes the song that's the same title as the title of this movie, which is R-E-S-P-E-C-T, and practices it with Carolyn and Irma as it awakens Ted at 3 a.m. As I remember that as a hit song I remember hearing it in a Robin Williams movie called Bicentennial Man, if you remember that movie from 1999, and sings it in as Aretha sings it in Madison Square Garden, in the concert in the year 1968. And the voice of the actresses playing the background singers, as well as Jennifer Hudson, sounds incredible. as the singing in this is absolutely incredible. After the concert, it's Aretha's birthday, as she becomes the Queen of Soul, and it works well for a biopic. Aretha writes more songs and records them as she goes in an interview with a reporter along with Ted on the TV, as I believe it was a documentary about Aretha Franklin, while the audience briefly goes back and forth as we get back to Aretha singing and recording her new album, which is a powerful singing by Jennifer Hudson. And if you've ever seen the movie Dreamgirls, you know she has a beautiful singing voice in general. As the song is about how she feels, and she tries to answer of how she feels about but can't find one another, and gets an award from Martin Luther King Jr. And after receiving it, she sings the new song, which she recorded while her children are there, along with Ted and the others in the audience. And a fan comes up to her, and she's singing about her life. Well, Ted comes off like a jackass, and they get to a meeting with Jerry and wants to talk about Europe tours, and Ted acts like a jackass to Jerry, as Aretha wants to go on TV and movies, and Ted makes demands to Jerry, and Aretha wants it that way. And I like the way Ted, is a horrible human being, and Aretha is the better person than Ted is, in my opinion. Aretha goes on the European tours, and people are throwing roses at Aretha as one guy tries to come on stage, and Ted wants to intervene as they throw roses at him, as well as gets interviewed by the press. And one of them brings up how Ted beat her in the hotel lobby, and they get to the hotel room, and Aretha has an abusive argument with Ted, and she wants to leave him. And I thought, please, for the love of God, leave him forever, please. While Aretha gets to Paris and sings a new song about the people that have been mistreated, and sings the song that I do know too, "Freedom, Freedom, Freedom," at that concert, while Ted watches her sing it and gets out of her sight, which serves him right, in my opinion, and have a successful tour without Ted. And she goes back to New York in her apartment with no Ted around, and she throws all of his stuff to the trash, And this movie is believing in Aretha Franklin as the Queen of Soul, and she deserves the title. Aretha calls a man over to sleep with her. I forget the guy's name off the top of my head, so forgive me for that. As they have a guests over, and they hear Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed, and Aretha sings at his funeral, and they bring out old footage of Martin Luther King's people standing up for him against violence towards African American folks. And Aretha goes to the bar with Mr. Franklin, as he sounds and acts depressed, as well as he was a great leader. And now, who's going to lead the African American folks? And Aretha wants to fight against the cops for killing one of their own. And Mr. Franklin asks Aretha to come back to gospel music, and she says no. Well, his wife Clara Ward, Mr. Franklin's wife, Clara Ward, I'll say, here's the conversation, and he gets defensive about it. And we move on to 1970 in the city of Los Angeles. And she discusses until Jerry with Jerry until she hears about Angela Davis's death, and she talks in the funeral. And Aretha acts angry with everybody, including Carolyn and Irma, and she acts abusive like the way Ted treated her, but she shows it to everyone, in some scenes, including the scene that keeps this movie stretching rather too long. Aretha wants to be alone as her man keeps secrets from her, as she sometimes trusts him, but not all the time, as people tell her to not go to her dark place, and she shakes her elbows to her man and gets a call from Cecil and tells her man she'll get sued sooner than later, and she goes on a concert tour while acting crazy, and she sings a song I've heard, despite I didn't know that was Aretha Franklin at the time, as I've heard it from a Julia Roberts movie, My Best Friend's Wedding. It goes like this: forever and ever, it's in my heart and you. Anyways, and Aretha falls down from the stage and goes home, and when she's back the next morning is here, and she drinks heavily, like a lot of alcohol in her system, and sees in her vision her mother as she sings Amazing Grace. And this was a sad scene, but at the same time, it was It's a sad movie, like I said before. The man comes back home and sees Aretha throwing the alcohol bottles in the trash bag as she decides to give up drinking and goes into church and sees James Cleveland, played by Titus Burgess, and decides to make a gospel album with or without Jerry, as he doesn't believe in the gospel record. And he does it along with a documentary about how she came from church and gospel music in the beginning of her life. And she wants to practice it herself, producer herself, excuse me. And she practices it, a song in the stillness, with the singers of church, and they sing it rather successfully along with Aretha. And they take 10 because she broke down and chats with James about how she's afraid the demon got stronger, and his advice to her is giving the song of God, which is a great speech. We get Mr. Franklin, who happens to arrive in California with Clara, and he helps her sing the songs she's going to say that night in church in the year 1972. And she performs in the church the song Amazing Grace with her powerful voice. And the biopic at the end tells the audience her love concert of Amazing Grace was released, and she got in the Hall of Fame amongst other stuff. And we get credits rolling to Aretha singing in an awards show leading up to the Oscars, while at the time President Barack Obama with his wife Michelle in attendance as the audience rises and cheers and for Aretha, as she unfortunately passed away in August 16th, 2018, excuse me. And the climax was well shot, as this is a powerful performance, as this is a pretty good movie, but how good was it? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 7.8 out of 10. The performances by the actors were great, as Jennifer Hudson has a beautiful, amazing singing voice, and her performance, and I can relate with every single character in this movie, even Forrest Whitaker, who has a powerful presence, and Marlon Wayans, whom I'm not the biggest fan of in general, but he does a good job at playing a bad character. With this, while the cinematography was fine in my opinion, and the editing scene in these scenes were good, but it was sort of a long movie, but it still works for a biopic. Sometimes it made me sad, as I felt bad for Aretha Franklin, and this is also a sad movie, but that's what biopics do best. And this is a pretty good movie with soul and spirit of African American singers, and Jennifer Hudson and the actresses playing her background singers have an absolutely incredible singing voices. And she is the queen of soul as Aretha Franklin. And Jennifer Hudson deserves the title too, like she does in my opinion. Excuse me. It was sad at times, and I wish Aretha didn't keep taking back Ted. Well, she only did it twice, and there were times the movie was stretching rather too long. And again, this is a long movie, but don't get me wrong. This is a recommendation for this movie, but it is the best movie. But is it the best movie ever made? Not in my opinion, but I liked it at the end of the day, as it works well for a biopic about a famous singer with hits. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for this review, and until we get to another one, RESPECT, find out what it means to me.